Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the sands and shadows of an ancient empire where dessert meant more than sweetness. It meant survival, ceremony, and sometimes even a little sorcery. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're barefoot on a stone path in the Persian twilight. Melon slices in one hand, a scent of jasmine trailing behind you, and something cold, miraculously cold, melting slowly in the other. You're in the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, where ice isn't just for bruises or overpriced coffee. It's a luxury, a symbol, a whisper of the mountains folded into fruit and spice. And right now, you're holding one of the earliest versions of ice cream. Yes, ice cream, in the middle of the desert. You probably won't survive this, because after tonight, your modern freezer aisle may never impress you again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, what's your local time, and where are you listening from? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a Persian garden, at dusk geometric pools reflecting the stars before they even appear. The air smells of citrus and wet earth. Somewhere off to your right, a fountain gurgles. And ahead of you, under a lattice of grapevines, sits a low stone tray piled with carved fruits, mint leaves, and bowls of something curiously cool. It's a kind of sorbet sherbet, perhaps chilled not with ice from a market, but with snow gathered from the distant Zagros Mountains. And here's the kicker. This isn't for royalty. Not just them, anyway. Even regular folks, if they planned well, could store and use snow in the middle of summer. It's not magic, it's engineering. But we'll get to that part later. For now, just imagine. 500 BCE, the desert is a furnace, and yet you're spooning icy sweetness into your mouth. Humanity, 1. Climate, 0. Mainstream historians will tell you this early Persian frozen treat was a kind of fruit mashed grape must, pomegranate juice, or even pulped melons mixed with chilled water or snow, creating something like an ancient slushy. Some of these were even perfumed with herbs. Mint was big, so was basil. You haven't lived until you've had basil-tinged pomegranate ice in a clay cup under a mulberry tree. But the fringe detail, the one that gets whispered about in dusty margins, is the idea that these early concoctions were sometimes laced with more than flavor. Some recipes list ingredients like poppy seed extract or even mandrake root. Was it medicinal? Sure. Was it recreational? Probably. Historians still argue whether these ice-cold elixirs were intended for cooling the body, curing the soul, or conjuring visions of things best left unmentioned. And here's a fun image for you. Picture a noble Persian lord reclining on a low divan, trailing his fingers in a bowl of icy melon puree, while a servant waves a fan made of ostrich feathers. Then shift your attention to a camel caravan, winding its way up Mount Alvand in January, carefully packing snow into insulated baskets, wrapping it in straw and felt, sealing it in jars of clay. That snow might not be served for weeks, but it'll survive. Ice didn't come easy. Every flake was a victory. And the melons? Oh, the melons. Persian melons were legendary long, ridged, golden on the outside, syrupy on the inside. Travelers from Greece and India wrote poetry about them. Some claimed they wept nectar when sliced. That's a bit dramatic. But honestly, if you tasted one, you'd probably weep too. Especially if it was chilled. Especially in a climate where room temperature feels like the inside of a kiln. Persia's obsession with fruit preservation was no accident. Drying, candying, stewing, pickling, yes, pickling fruit. That's a thing. But the true masterpiece was taking something perishable and turning it into a cool, ephemeral burst on the tongue. That took planning, coordination, probably a touch of divine pleading. And all of this existed centuries before refrigeration, air conditioning, or little humming machines with freezer drawers that always seem to jam when you're sleepy and craving ice. The Persians made dessert against the odds, and that somehow makes every flavor taste braver. Oh, and don't romanticize it too much. Sometimes the snow was less than pristine. Depending on where it came from, it could be a little dusty, maybe a bit smoky from nearby cooking fires. There's even a cheeky rumor that high-ranking officials would request their snow only from the north side of the mountain, because that's where the clean spirits slept. Apparently, you didn't want your dessert haunted. But honestly, haunted snow sounds kind of poetic. I'd take that over the freezer burn any day. And you're lucky you're starting your journey at the beginning, the very edge of the empire's most decadent invention. Ahead lies the world of saffron creams, vermicelli sorbets, donkey milk ices, and the strange miracle of a desert that figured out how to make snow sing. So go ahead, take one more bite of that melon slush mix. Let the cold ripple through your teeth, and remember, somewhere under those same stars, someone was doing exactly the same thing, just in silk robes with a much better view. You duck your head as you descend into the yakhchal, the earth swallowing you in a cool, damp hush. The heat from above disappears almost instantly, replaced by the chilled breath of centuries-old ingenuity. You're standing inside what looks like a giant inverted beehive, a domed structure of mud brick and lime rising above ground, while beneath your feet, the chamber plummets deep into the earth. Welcome to Ancient Persia's fridge. No humming machinery, no blinking lights, just the careful alignment of bricks, airflow, and human stubbornness. You rub your arms as a draft tickles past. It's cold, legitimately cold, in the middle of a desert, and all thanks to a structure called the yakhchal, literally, ice pit. It's one of those things historians agree is genius. Imagine you're in Yazd, where summer routinely cooks the land past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet, under this strange dome, slabs of ice rest on layered straw, cool and untouched. These ice pits weren't just clever. They were architectural sorcery. The thick walls, up to 2 meters thick in places, kept the heat out. The dome shape allowed warm air to rise and escape, while cool air lingered below. And the best part? These things were passive. No electricity, no moving parts, just airflow and gravity doing the hard work. The ice was either brought down from mountain snowfields in winter, or, more impressively, manufactured right there, using shallow pools of water that froze overnight during the coldest months, then harvested and stored. You wander through the corridor, your fingertips brushing the stone. A worker might have stood here once, sweating despite the chill, arranging ice blocks and stuffing herbs between layers. Mint to ward off mold, bay leaves to confuse insects, maybe even rose petals, because why not? If your ice is going to melt, it might as well smell divine. Here's a fun detail. Yakhchal walls were made from a special concoction called saruz, a waterproof mix of clay, egg whites, lime, ash, goat hair, and sand. Sounds like a cursed cake recipe, right? But it made the structure resistant to heat, moisture, and even earthquakes. It's a material engineers today still find baffling. Historians still argue whether sarouj was invented independently in Persia or adapted from Mesopotamian building techniques. Either way, it's held up pretty well for something a couple thousand years old. And it wasn't just ice that got stored here. Some yakhchals were used for dairy, fresh fruit, flour preserves, even pickled fish. If you're raising an eyebrow at pickled fish in an ice pit, same. But imagine it. Feasts on feast days, cooled wine in ceramic jugs, and bundles of grapes still plump in the height of summer. Of course, you weren't just going to waltz in here and grab a handful of ice like it was a 7-Eleven. Ice was rationed, logged, guarded. Servants were trained not to touch it directly. There were protocols, hierarchies. One wrong move, and you might get reassigned from ice duty to camel grooming, which, let's be honest, is a significant downgrade in prestige and olfactory experience. And while Persian nobles enjoyed their sherbets and chilled fruit, common people had their own more rustic versions. They didn't have gold-rimmed goblets or garden banquets, but they could store a chunk of ice wrapped in oiled cloth, tucked into a ceramic pot, and pull it out on blistering days to make humble versions of the same treat. Everyone, it seems, wanted just a little taste of cold luxury. By now, your eyes have adjusted to the gloom, and you spot something half buried in a corner. A broken clay bowl, stained faintly pink. Maybe a pomegranate, maybe cherry. Someone hundreds of years ago probably sat right here, taking a stolen moment with a spoonful of something cold while nobody was looking. That, or they dropped their dessert and cried all the way home. And above you, the dome still stands, whispering down drafts of air cooled not just by physics, but by legacy. Some of these structures still exist unused, maybe, but not forgotten. They say the ancient engineers were obsessed with balance. Hot and cold, dry and wet, light and shadow. The yakhchal was their masterpiece. A place where the searing summer sun was beaten by silence and shade. It's humbling, isn't it? All the wires and buttons and apps we use today just to make a smoothie. And here, under layers of earth, the Persians figured out how to keep ice all summer long with nothing but mud, math, and the occasional chicken egg. You move to leave, brushing one last time against the icy air that has lingered here longer than any empire. Outside, the sun still blazes. But now you know its secret opponent. A quiet dome, a cooling breath, a whisper of winter stored in clay. And maybe, just maybe, you tuck away that detail about sarouj in case your fridge ever dies and you feel like getting really creative. You emerge from the cool belly of the yakhchal and step straight into sunlight, so bright it could bleach your soul. Your skin prickles, your ears hum. Somewhere nearby, someone's roasting lamb, but your mind is still wrapped around the frost that clung to your fingertips moments ago. And now, you're about to taste the most iconic flavor in the entire frozen Persian playbook. Saffron and snow. Yes, saffron, those delicate red filaments that cost more than your monthly coffee habit. It's not just for paella or trendy lattes. In ancient Persia, it was a crown jewel, both spice and symbol, blended into rice, woven into perfume, and yes, whisked into chilled desserts like some divine finishing touch. Picture this. A shallow silver bowl, cold enough to fog the air around it. Inside, crushed ice or snow glistens with melted grape syrup. And over it all, a slow pour of saffron water infused until golden, speckled with threads and thick with the scent of sun-warmed hay and honey. You dip your spoon. The cold hits first sharp and clean, Then comes the perfume. Floral, earthy, slightly metallic. And just when you think that's all, a tiny bit of sugar at the end, like the universe remembered. Dessert isn't supposed to taste like dry spice rack. Some versions added rosewater, others a dash of lime. A few fringe recipes even include pulverized pistachios or almond milk frozen into flakes. This wasn't ice cream in the modern churned, creamy sense. It was closer to a snow slush, an edible spell cast during the hottest part of the year. Mainstream historical texts describe saffron as a culinary staple of Persian royalty. It was cultivated carefully, harvested at dawn, and dried in the shade. It took thousands of flowers to make a single ounce. It wasn't a flavor, it was a statement. Even the act of serving it in frozen form said something like, yes, we live in the desert. And yes, we're extra. But then there are the more curious theories. Some believe saffron in snow-based dishes wasn't just about taste or status, it was medicinal. Ancient Persian physicians wrote about its warming effect on the body, strangely paired with the chilling effect of ice. Contradictory? Totally. Delicious? Also yes. Historians still argue whether this pairing was made for its health benefits or just to make the guest list jealous. Here's a quirky little footnote. 1/10th century. Persian text references saffron ice being served during weddings, not just for refreshment, but to encourage laughter. Seriously. It was believed saffron made people giggly, which, honestly, tracks. If you hand me snow mixed with rare spice in the middle of a heat wave, I'm going to laugh too, mostly out of disbelief. You find yourself seated cross-legged beside a shady fig tree, spooning this golden slush into your mouth like it's the secret to immortality. And maybe it kind of is, because in this moment, you're not just cooling off. You're connecting with centuries of spice caravans, mountain climbers gathering snow, and cooks who thought, sure, let's put the world's most expensive flour on ice. Even today, in modern Iran, saffron ice desserts like bastani sanati and faludi still dominate summer menus. But they've gotten creamier, flashier, decked out in toppings and syrups. Back then, it was simpler. Just snow, sugar, and saffron. A poem of opposites. Let's take a moment for your nose. That warm, smoky scent of saffron, it doesn't hit all at once. It sneaks up, fills the space behind your eyes, sits at the top of your breath like a sunbeam filtered through velvet curtains. You don't taste saffron. You sort of experience it, like a sunset in your mouth. And if you're wondering how they got snow to survive the journey from mountaintop to garden banquet, remember your time in the yakhchal. It's a relay race between nature and design. Winter's gift tucked into straw bundles, then hidden beneath domes, then pulled out at just the right moment for maximum awe. One story, probably apocryphal, but deliciously so, claims a certain Persian queen demanded her sherbet always be made with the first snow of the season. It had to be gathered by moonlight. It had to be untouched by animal or human hand. It had to be pure, which sounds romantic until you picture the poor servant sprinting up a mountain at 2 a.m. with a bucket. This obsession with purity, with timing, with drama, it's what made these flavors unforgettable. No preservatives, no refrigeration, no backup plans, just craftsmanship and an eye on the sky. And now that you've had your fill of saffron and snow, you lie back under the fig tree, sticky and serene, wondering what other miracles the ancients tucked into their frosty delights. But don't worry, we're only just starting to scrape the surface of this sweet, strange, ice-drenched story. You blink lazily beneath the fig tree's shade, the last shiver of saffron snow still on your tongue, when a vendor walks by pushing a wheeled cart lined with copper bowls. A bell jingles gently. You lift your head, and suddenly you're looking at something unfamiliar. Is that noodles? An ice cream? Welcome to Faluda, or Paluda, depending on the region and century. A dish so oddly textured, so delightfully confusing, it makes your brain freeze just trying to categorize it. Is it sorbet? Is it pasta? Is it dessert or a prank? The answer, of course, is yes. The bowl arrives, cold enough to fog the edges. Nestled inside are translucent threads like rice noodles, but thinner suspended in a slushy bath of semi-frozen syrup. You poke it with your spoon. The threads jiggle like polite jellyfish. You scoop. You taste. It's icy, tart, lightly perfumed with rosewater. And then, the noodles hit a soft, chewy contrast to the crunch of the ice. You don't know whether to eat faster or sit back and philosophize about texture. Here's the mainstream history bit. Faluda dates back over 2,000 years, likely originating in Shiraz, a city of poets, wine, and sensory indulgence. It was one of the earliest frozen desserts to combine starch and syrup vermicelli-like noodles made from starch, laid into a semi-frozen syrup of sugar, rosewater, and occasionally lime juice. It was served icy, not creamy, refreshing, not heavy, and more than a little bewildering. Now for the quirky. Some 12th century Persian texts mention vendors weaving faludi into little frozen nests using twigs and fingers, stacking them like delicate snowflowers on chilled trays. I don't know about you, but I've never been offered noodle sculptures on ice by a man with a poetry degree. That's the Shiraz guarantee. And as for the taste, light, whispery, like if sorbet were having an existential crisis about being too straightforward. Historians still argue whether faluda was meant to be a standalone dish or a palate cleanser between heavier courses. Some even think it was originally medicinal, used to cool internal fires, which, if you've ever had a plate of ancient Persian lamb stew, checks out. You recline again, letting the sweetness dissolve into your molars. And yes, that's a rose petal clinging to the corner of your mouth. You leave it there. It feels right. Faluda was often eaten during summer festivals, weddings, and most importantly, during Nowruz, the Persian New Year. Picture entire families gathering in garden courtyards, string lights wrapped around date palms, while giant shallow trays of faluda rested on beds of ice. Little kids with sticky fingers, grandmothers fanning themselves with embroidered napkins, and somewhere in the background, someone playing the Santara hammered dulcimer as you chew your noodles of snow. It's the contrast that gets you. Cold but chewy, sweet but tangy, familiar yet alien. If saffron snow was the sunset, then faluda is moonlight on a mirror-fragmented, shifting ephemeral. And here's a detail most food historians won't mention. Certain street vendors, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, were famous not just for the taste of their faluda, but for the soundtrack. They'd sing as they scooped. Soft, looping verses of love poems or prayers, timed to the rhythm of their mixing spoons. It wasn't just dessert, it was theater. A kind of edible lullaby. You can almost hear it now, can't you? The soft scrape of the spoon, the bell on the cart. The half-soon poetry drifted down the street like rose-scented fog. And if you're wondering what modern faluda looks like, it's still around. especially in Shiraz. Still chilled, still chewy, still baffling tourists who expected a scoop of creamy vanilla and got what looks like a frozen noodle salad. But those who fall for it fall hard. You might even be one of them. Go ahead, admit it. You're already mentally trying to figure out how to make it at home. So you scrape your bowl clean, wondering whether dessert should always be this strange and subtle. Maybe dessert isn't about indulgence. Maybe it's about curiosity. Because nothing wakes you up and cools you down like frozen noodles swimming in poetry. You're walking again, this time down a quiet lane lined with cedar and orange trees, their shadows long in the late afternoon sun. The air is rich with a smell so delicate, so utterly unexpected, it almost feels like perfume has entered your sinuses by mistake. It's rose water, not the kind used in trendy moisturizers or hipster cocktails. This is real rose water, damask rose water. The ancient Persian obsession, distilled in clay stills and used with a kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred scrolls. And you're about to taste it in frozen form. Your next icy experience is simple. A small dish of crystallized snow, topped with a syrup made from sugar, lime, and an absurd amount of rosewater. You lift your spoon, half expecting it to taste like soap. It doesn't. It tastes like memories, like sunlight filtered through gauze curtains, like the color pink if it had a temperature. Rosewater wasn't just a flavor, it was a cultural cornerstone. Persian gardens were famous for their roses, especially the Gal-e-Mohammadi or damask rose. Grown in abundance around Kashan and Shiraz, these roses were picked at dawn, when the scent was strongest, and immediately taken to be distilled. Huge copper stills, clay pipes, glass jars, entire village economies built around coaxing that fragrance into liquid. Mainstream history confirms that by the 9th century CE, Persian apothecaries had perfected the technique of extracting rose oil and water, using distillation methods that would influence both Arab and European science. But here's the twist. Long before they used it in medicine or perfume, they were putting it in food. And not just any food. Sweet syrups, rice puddings, cakes, and of course, frozen delicacies. One popular dessert was sorbet-e-gal, a rosewater syrup poured over chipped ice or snow and served in tiny glass cups during hot summer evenings. It wasn't meant to overwhelm you. It was supposed to lull you. Quirky fact incoming. In some towns, especially during Nowruz, there were competitions to see who could distill the strongest rosewater in the fewest petals. Entire families developed secret ratios. A few even claimed their rosewater was so powerful, one drop could perfume a city block. Historians still argue whether that was exaggeration or just local marketing flair. And while royalty might sip their rose snow in engraved bowls, street vendors had their own style. Picture a man in a linen shirt, hands stained faintly pink, pushing a cart with a copper tank and a spout shaped like a bird's beak. He lifts a brass ladle, dips into the tank, and pours rose syrup over a scoop of shaved ice, humming a tune that doesn't have a name anymore. You take a bite, and suddenly, your whole mouth feels like it's walking through a rose garden at dusk. It's floral but not cloying, sweet but not sticky. It dances right at the edge of memory, like a dream you almost remember. This obsession with rosewater bled into every corner of Persian life. It was sprinkled on guests as a greeting, poured into tea, dabbed on pillows to invite good dreams. Some even placed it on graves, believing its fragrance soothed wandering spirits. So of course it belonged in dessert. How could it not? You wander past a small gathering of women sitting in a courtyard, each with a bowl of faluda, but now it's scented with rosewater instead of lime. The combination is hypnotic. Chewy starch threads laced with the breath of petals. The women are quiet, smiling, watching the sun inch lower over the tiled rooftops. And it hits you, rosewater wasn't just a taste, it was a mood, a setting, a decision to slow down. There's even a tale half myth, half maybe true about a Persian scholar who tasted rose-flavored ice so perfect, he refused to eat anything else for the rest of the summer. His students had to cart bowls of it into his study, while he scribbled notes and muttered about divine proportions. He probably wasn't invited to many dinner parties after that. But you get it now. The ice was never just ice. The rose was never just rose. Together, they told a story. And tonight, that story still clings to your lips like perfume. You leave the courtyard behind as twilight slips over the rooftops like a silk veil. Lamps flicker to life, casting golden halos in every window, and the streets buzz with a quiet anticipation. Tonight, there's a feast. Not for a king, though one might show up anyway, but for diplomacy, for storytelling, for alliances sealed not with parchment, but with chilled fruit drinks laced with secrets. You find yourself seated among a gathering of dignitaries, merchants from Samarkand, poets from Isfahan, a scholar with ink-stained cuffs, and before you, on a low lacquered table, stand glass decanters of something bright and trembling sherbet. No, not sorbet, not quite juice either. Sherbet is something older, deeper. A fruit-based syrup, infused with herbs or flowers, diluted with water or snow, and served ice-cold in crystal or clay. It's the drink version of a secret handshake. Mainstream historians trace the origins of sherbet back to the 7th century CE or earlier, when Persian medical and culinary texts began recommending herbal syrups mixed with water to balance the body's humors. But quickly, it slipped from doctors' orders into the realm of decadence. These syrups came in every imaginable flavor: pomegranate, sour cherry, mulberry, quince, even cucumber and vinegar. Some were spiced with cinnamon or cloves, others perfumed with orange blossom, or you guessed it, rosewater. You raise a glass. The liquid is dark crimson, thick like syrup, then cut with a scoop of powdered snow that instantly melts into it, creating rivulets of sweetness across the inside of the cup. You take a sip. It's tart, bright, almost electric on the tongue, somewhere between cough syrup and ambrosia. And here's the twist. Sherbet wasn't just served at home. It was diplomatic currency. An elite host might send a special batch to a visiting envoy, the exact recipe tailored to signal respect, alliance, or subtle disdain. A sherbet too sweet might imply weakness, too sour, an insult. Add too much rosewater, and you might be accused of flattery. Too little, and your guest might think you believe they smell. No pressure. Quirky detail time. During the early Safavid period, there was a palace steward whose sole job was to oversee the flavor mood of the sherbet offerings. That's right, a vibe sommelier for icy drinks. His daily reports allegedly included phrases like, "Today's pomegranate lacked diplomacy," and "the orange blossom was too eager." Historians still argue whether this role was symbolic or just a very specific kind of stress relief for the royal staff. You glance across the table. One guest lifts a silver straw and sips with their eyes closed. Another gently spins a lemon slice in their glass like it's a compass. And you realize that everyone here is reading each other's drinks the way others might read tone or posture. Sharbat carts were also common in the bazaar's copper containers, cooled with internal ice chambers, dispensing icy drinks to shoppers and laborers under the punishing sun. Vendors would shout out flavors like market criers. Cherry, basil seed, tamarind, cold enough to forgive your mother-in-law. The best part? Some recipes were inherited, like family jewels, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, guarded behind spice racks and coded in poetry. One 13th century poem ends with this line: "May your sharbat bloom like spring's first pomegranate." Sweet, right? Also a recipe. Tonight, your host clinks their glass gently with yours. You smile. No need for translators. This sharbat says everything. Welcome, respect, cool down, stay a little longer. And as you sip, you wonder, why did we stop doing this? Why did we trade poetic syrups and snow for lukewarm soda and drive-through iced tea? But don't worry, we're not done. Because the next flavor might just bite you back. You wake the next morning in a room shaded by lattice windows, the scent of last night's sharbat still lingering in the air. Someone's left a tray at your door, clay dishes of dried fruit, candied peels, and what looks like something illegal, or at least questionably legal. Welcome to the mysterious, forgotten world of forbidden fruits and ancient peels. The bowl in your hand contains slivers of quince, glossy from sugar, folded beside translucent bits of citron rind. It looks innocent, but these flavors weren't always welcome at the table. Quince, what a fruit. Fuzzy on the outside like a sleepy peach, but on the inside, tart, powerful, practically inedible raw unless you're into chewing garden furniture. But once it's boiled, baked, or most luxuriously candied and cooled over snow, it becomes golden, floral, almost like a baked pear crossed with sunshine. In ancient Persia, quince was considered both a delicacy and a cure-all. Mainstream historians note that quince preserves were common in royal courts. But it was more than just sweet, some believed. It brought love, healed sadness, and awkwardly enough, was a subtle fertility charm. It was sometimes gifted to brides. Just a friendly little hint, wrapped in wax paper. And then there's citron, not lemon citron. Huge, knobbly, full of pith and bitterness. Its rind was boiled and sweetened to make maraba, a type of preserve that could be eaten with bread or shaved into chilled drinks. The ice would crunch around the bittersweet threads, like a snowstorm clinging to orange zest. But the forbiddens part? Well, not all fruits were welcome everywhere. Certain ingredients, especially during various religious or regional shifts, were frowned upon or outright banned from being served at court. Tamarind, for instance, was considered far too sour by some rulers, and by others, too Indian. Vinegar-based fruit syrups made people suspicious. Even melon-yes, your sweet old friend, was once temporarily blacklisted from the tables of the ultra-pious for being too sensual. Historians still argue whether these bans were really about health, religion, or just political mood swings disguised as dietary concern. But food, especially sweet food, has always had the power to stir more than the stomach. Quirky tale alert. There's a 14th century manuscript that tells of a palace cook who was caught fermenting dried figs in a hidden chamber. He wasn't brewing alcohol technically, but the mixture had begun to bubble. The resulting frozen fig and spice dish? Too delicious. The ruling vizier declared it a temptation disguised in fruit skin. The punishment? Unclear, but the recipe vanished for 200 years. And here's where the ancient Persians get really clever. They didn't just eat fruit fresh. They preserved it with honey, spices, or ash. Yes, ash. Some rural communities would coat fresh dates or peaches in clean wood ash to prevent spoilage and maintain texture. The fruit was rinsed, cooled, then sometimes even served over chilled syrup. A smoky aftertaste, but oddly pleasant. You try a piece of candied citron. It crackles slightly between your teeth. The sweetness is sharp, but there's something else, some ancient bitterness that makes you feel like you're not just eating fruit, but a rumor. A flavor that maybe wasn't meant for everyone. And remember that sorbet from last night? Many of those syrups began life as fruit rinds steeped in vinegar or syrup for days. You'd never guess the base of that ambrosia was once a tough little rind that nobody wanted to eat. The Persian kitchen was many things, but wasteful wasn't one of them. One royal physician even claimed that pickled quince served cold could cure ailments of melancholy, heat, and ungrateful children. That last one's probably a translation error. But you never know. So here you are chewing forbidden's fruit in a quiet morning room, knowing that each bite once carried meaning. Some flavors were symbols, others acts of rebellion. Some were apologies in disguise. And if you're wondering whether any of these forgotten fruits still survive today, the answer is yes. In old Tehran sweet shops, you can still find preserved barberries, tamarind slushies, and cold melon cubes dusted with cinnamon. They've changed. Of course they have. But somewhere underneath, the ancient layers still linger tart, sweet, dangerous. So go ahead, pop another sliver of quince in your mouth. Just keep an eye out. You never know which fruits have unfinished business. You're in a kitchen now barefoot, surrounded by jars that glimmer like stained glass in the slanted light. Cinnamon sticks, cardamom pods, dried limes like little leather moons. Someone's grinding something with a stone mortar, and the whole room smells like secrets steeped in sugar. Tonight's frozen flavors aren't fruity. They're spiced like a secret scroll. You lift the lid. A puff of clove hits you square in the sinuses. Another jar nutmeg, another dried rose petals. Then there's something stranger. Tiny brown seeds labeled golpar. You give them a sniff. Earthy, peppery, sharp. What is this stuff? Golpar, also known as Persian hogweed, was often ground into sherbets and even sprinkled over cold melon or snow. Some say it was used for digestion. Others say it keeps away bad spirits. Either way, it tastes like fennel and revenge. Mainstream historians agree that spice use in Persian cuisine wasn't about heat. It was about depth, balance, aroma. You wouldn't toss chili into your dessert here. You'd use cardamom with its ghostly menthol whisper, or cinnamon for warmth, maybe a sliver of dried ginger, or crushed coriander seeds, which somehow taste like citrus, had a philosophical breakthrough. You're handed a shallow silver bowl of something cold and brownish gold. It's shaved ice, soaked in a syrup made from date molasses, cinnamon, and the tiniest splash of vinegar to keep it from tipping too sweet. Floating on top, a whole star anise, like a spiced shuriken of elegance. You sip, it's rich, almost savory. Then the cinnamon blooms. The vinegar peeks through. The molasses lingers. You feel like you just drank an ancient riddle. And here comes the quirky part. Some Persian families would write short poems or fortunes in and freeze them inside ice cubes or slush dishes. You'd get your dessert and a message. A sweet tooth hides a bitter tongue, one might read. Or, if the clove burns, you've been thinking impure thoughts. Little edible judgments. Historians still argue whether this was tradition, game, or deeply passive-aggressive dinner theater. Then there's the mystery of paradise seeds. You've never heard of them? That's fair, because no one really knows what they are. Medieval Persian recipes mention jana dana, literally seeds of paradise added to cool dishes. Some believe it refers to grains of paradise, a spice similar to cardamom. Others think it's a poetic way of saying, whatever smells divine, grind it and add a pinch. A few historians think it was saffron's lost cousin. A few think it might have just been branding. Regardless, the idea was always the same. Your frozen treat should hint at heaven, or at least confuse your taste buds into thinking they were ascending. You're offered another bowl, this one shimmering with what looks like crushed coriander seeds and little flecks of saffron. You dip your spoon and find the ice mixed with ground almond and a spoonful of honey. It's sweet, yes, but the kind of sweetness that hides behind a curtain and waits to surprise you. And these spiced ices weren't just served at home. Poets in Shiraz famously wrote verses comparing love to cinnamon in cold wine. Ice vendors had signature spice blends. One might lean into clove and mint, another into basil seed and lime. People had favorites, rivalries, allegiances based on spice profiles. Here's a light joke from a 10th century joke book. She said he was as cold as shaved ice and twice as bitter. So he added cardamom. She still left. Comedy, Persian style. You close your eyes. The air smells like warm spice and cold mist. Your tongue tingles. Your breath feels like it's flavored. You're not just eating a dessert. You're reading an edible library. Each bowl tells a different story. Of trade, of experimentation, of someone in a robe standing over a clay bowl thinking, what if I added this seed nobody uses anymore? And the best part? No recipe was ever final. Everyone changed them, tweaked, added, hid their favorite blend like it was a family secret. Even today, in certain cities in Iran, you can order shaved ice with a custom spice mix. Ask what's in it, and they'll just smile. So take another bite. Let the cinnamon make your shoulders drop. Let the cardamom lift the corners of your mouth. And if the clove burns, well, maybe your thoughts aren't as innocent as you think. You're in a pasture now, yes, really. Soft hills, dry grass, the occasional distant bleat of something with more opinions than teeth. The sun's dipping low, throwing gold across the landscape, and in your hands is a bowl of something, suspiciously creamy. It's not cow's milk, not goat's either. Tonight, you're tasting donkey milk and desert cream. You brace yourself, you sip. It's cold, surprisingly rich, with a faint grassy sweetness and a texture that slides across your tongue like velvet with a hint of mischief. It's not as odd as it sounds. Actually, it's delightful, a little wild, a little wrong, and you already want another spoonful. Here's the historical backdrop. Dairy in ancient Persia was more flexible than we imagine. Cows weren't always the default, especially in drier regions. Goats, sheep, and yes, even donkeys were milked. Donkey milk had a reputation for being nourishing, gentle on the stomach, and believe it or not, beautiful for the skin. Mainstream historians have recorded references to donkey milk being used in both medicine and cosmetics. Cleopatra bathed in the stuff. But in Persia, it found its way into food, slowly frozen in ceramic bowls or skin-lined pouches, often sweetened with grape must or honey, and flavored with rose or herbs. Now, did everyone love it? No. Some people were deeply skeptical of the flavor. Others considered it desperate milk, used when other animals weren't producing. And yes, historians still argue whether donkey milk ice was a niche curiosity, a medical food, or a clever use of limited livestock options. But then you get to the cream. Ah, the desert cream. This wasn't whipped in mixers or churned with ice cubes. This was something much slower, made from simmering fresh milk over low fires, letting the cream rise, skimming it, cooling it, and repeating, over and over, then finally flavoring it. You're handed a shallow bowl. This one's chilled with the help of the nearest yakhchal. The surface is glassy and pale, swirled with threads of orange blossom syrup and scattered pine nuts. It's not as cold as snow ice, but it's soft, lush, like the desert's idea of ice cream after a long philosophical nap. And it gets weirder. Some communities mixed this chilled cream with mashed dates and ground nuts, forming little frozen patties served during wedding ceremonies. Others flavored it with dried black lime, giving it an oddly tart, smoky profile. One rural tradition even involved adding a dash of wait-for-it ashes from aromatic wood to create a faint campfire note. Here's the quirky bit. One 11th century cookbook insists that milk from a happy donkey will yield sweeter cream. No word on how they measured donkey joy. Possibly through tail swishes per hour. Possibly a vibe thing. Another recipe mentions cooling the cream under moonlight to enhance its calming effects. Was it a metaphor? Was it a timing instruction? Historians still shrug. But if you've ever eaten a chilled dessert by moonlight, you get it. You pause for a moment, looking out over the pasture. A small herd of donkeys wander lazily through the dust, utterly unaware they were once unwitting artisans in the world's strangest ice cream lineage. And here's a soft truth. Ancient desserts weren't always about cravings. Sometimes they were about resilience, about using what was available, what could be milked, chilled, preserved. There were no industrial dairies, no stabilizers, just patience, fire, cold, and curiosity. You take another bite. This one is cream mixed with finely chopped pistachios and cardamom. The kind of dessert that makes you think about things, like why you've never tasted donkey milk before, or why it's actually kind of amazing. Today, modern Persian ice cream Bastani Sanati is mostly made with cow's milk, churned until elastic and sticky with orchid root powder and mastic resin. But echoes of the old traditions linger in rural pockets. In the way some recipes call for a dash of salt. In the stories, grandmothers tell about the milks we don't speak of anymore. So tonight, you honor them, the nameless herders, the nocturnal milkers, the accidental inventors of the world's most controversial frozen treat. And you swallow the last spoonful slowly, grateful that the donkey in question will never know how oddly nostalgic its milk turned out to be. You're standing in a bustling square now, ankle-deep in powdered dust, with sun-drenched children zigzagging past carts of watermelon slices and fresh mint. Laughter rings out, mingling with the slap-slap of leather sandals and the hiss of copper kettles. Then, through it all, comes the unmistakable crunch. You turn. A vendor is hacking away at a giant block of snow snow kept under thick folds of straw and cloth inside a shaded wooden cart. With a practiced flick, He shaves off a pile of fine ice into a ceramic bowl, then drowns it in glistening syrup. Congratulations! You've just discovered the Persian precursor to the modern snow cone. Sweet syrups and snow cones, circa 1,000 years before neon food coloring made the scene. This was the dessert of the people. Simple, immediate, satisfying. It was called barfi shirin, literally, sweet snow. And while it didn't involve fancy distillation or creamy bases, it had one core requirement: fresh, clean mountain snow. Mainstream history places these snowy concoctions as early as the Achaemenid Empire. Ice, either imported from the mountains or made using shallow nighttime basins in desert towns, was piled into bowls and flavored with syrups made from local fruits. Think sour cherry, mulberry, pomegranate, lime. But that's just the start. Some of these syrups had aged for months, boiled, spiced, strained, stored. One popular favorite was sekenjabin, a sharp, sweet syrup made from vinegar and honey or sugar. On paper, it sounds weird. In your mouth, it's electric. Pour it over snow, toss in a few crushed mint leaves, and suddenly, your tongue is on a very classy roller coaster. And here comes the quirky flourish. Some street vendors used miniature sieves to create textured snow piles. They didn't just dump ice. They sculpted it. Domes, waves, floral mounds that looked like something a pastry chef might sketch in a fever dream. One guy was allegedly famous for carving snow into tiny swans. He lost several fingers to frostbite, gained a fan base. You take your bowl and walk. Every bite a contrast of textures. Soft syrup, crunchy snow, occasionally a sprig of tarragon or crushed basil for kick. Children slurp theirs greedily, noses red from cold. Elders sip slowly, each spoonful a pause in the heat. Lovers share a single bowl, two spoons dancing awkwardly close. Historians still argue whether these early snow desserts count as the first true sorbet. Some say yes ice plus syrup equals sorbet in its earliest form. Others argue it lacks churning, texture, and cream. Honestly, let the scholars debate. You're too busy trying to keep yours from melting. On one hand, you now hold a version flavored with carrot and cinnamon, yes, carrot. Sweet, earthy, oddly refreshing. In another, a tamarind syrup snow pile, tangy and bitter like a love letter you didn't ask to read. And guess what? These frozen treats weren't just about taste. They were about social rhythm. The first snow of the season brought lines of people to known vendors. Some would hoard snow from late winter storms in secret pits, hoping to be the last in town still selling chilled sweets come August. One eccentric noble even had a personal snow inspector who sampled and reported on the snow's fluffiness before the evening meal. Too wet? He'd send it back. Too coarse? Heads might roll figuratively, we hope. And while the flavors changed with time, the form remained the same. A humble bowl, cold as sin, sweet as memory. There's something poetic in the way the snow melts, just fast enough that you can't forget it's temporary. A fleeting miracle right there in your hand. Eat it too slow, and you're left with syrup soup. Too fast, and you miss the nuance. So you sit on a low wall, your feet dusty, your face sticky, watching people drift past with dripping spoons and syrup-stained smiles. And you wonder, when did desserts become shelf-stable? When did we stop trusting ice to be brief and beautiful? Tonight, there's no refrigeration. Just snow, syrup, and sunlight falling across a plaza full of people licking spoons like they've just tasted the moon. The plaza fades behind you, replaced now by torches and music. You're being led gently, ceremonially into the outer garden of a noble estate. The air buzzes with Nowruz energy, the Persian New Year. And tonight, you won't just nibble snow. You're joining a full-on feast of opposites, feasts of ice in Firelands. A table stretches ahead like something from a dream. Bowls of glowing fruit, towering trays of sweets, skewers of fire-charred meats, and right in the center, a cluster of cold dishes served over glowing blocks of translucent ice. Yes, glowing. The ice is so clear it catches the flicker of nearby lanterns, pulsing with gold and shadow like a sleeping god's breath. This is the paradox at the heart of Persian celebration. Fire and ice, heat and cool, sun and shade. Everything in balance, every flavor set against its counterpoint. Mainstream historians describe Nowruz as a pre-Islamic festival with Zoroastrian roots, marking the vernal equinox with renewal, family, and food. So much food. But what they don't always dwell on is just how cold some of those celebratory dishes were. You're handed a small porcelain bowl. Inside, thin slices of cold lamb, slow roasted and then chilled with a marinade of yogurt, mint and vinegar, arranged over crushed ice with pomegranate seeds sprinkled like rubies. It's refreshing, savory, shockingly modern. You blink. The flavor keeps changing with every bite meat, then herb, then tang. Another dish arrives. A salad of shredded beetroot, pickled plum, and shaved ice, dressed in rose vinegar. It's crisp, sharp, and entirely unlike any salad you've met before. Even sweets get the fire and ice treatment. One tray holds pistachio halva carved into flower shapes, each piece resting atop a petal of rosewater snow. The halva melts into the ice, and the resulting puddle tastes like a nutty perfume dream. Then there's the centerpiece, a dome of saffron rice, chilled with threads of orange zest and almond slivers, served with frozen grape molasses and a whisper of cinnamon. You take a bite. Your mouth buzzes with contrast cold and warm, sweet and tart, soft and icy. And here's the quirky bit. There's a Nowruz superstition that says you must eat 7 temperatures during the night, 7 degrees of sensation. From scalding stew to snow-cooled sorbet, the new year forget to bring you variety. Some families even numbered their courses by texture and temperature, creating edible choreographies of opposites. One ancient poet wrote, "A year with one flavor is a year unlived." Across the garden, a noble woman carefully ladles something pale and misty into small cups. It's chilled almond milk infused with dates and wild fennel, served just above freezing. You sip. It tastes like nostalgia wearing silk. And yet, there's a whisper of heat in the back of your throat. Was that ginger? Clove? A trick of the firelight? Historians still argue whether the cold dishes of Nowruz were symbolic or merely seasonal. Some say they were meant to echo winter's passing. Others argue they represented renewal, the cool breath before spring's full bloom. Either way, the message was clear. Balance is everything. And not just in taste. In how you sat, how you toasted, how long you held your bowl before offering it to someone else. Even the direction you passed the sherbet tray mattered. One direction brought luck. The other, indigestion and mild social exile. The evening deepens. Music hums from a string ensemble tucked behind a curtain of jasmine. A fire crackles in a stone pit, warming your feet even as your spoon draws iciness toward your core. One servant brings a dish once rumored to be reserved only for kings. Saffron ice stuffed with date paste and rose petal jam, then topped with crushed pistachios. It's served on a cold metal plate, wrapped in silk to keep the chill. Another brings faluda, but this time with cinnamon noodles and frozen pear. You laugh out loud. It shouldn't work, but somehow it does. You lean back full, glowing, and in that golden moment, you understand why these frozen dishes weren't just indulgence. They were celebrated in edible form, a proof that humans clever, stubborn, deeply sentimental could create cold miracles even in firelands. So as fireworks crack across the sky and someone begins a poem about seasons and patience, you take one last spoonful of saffron snow, warmed faintly by the air, and whisper something you don't even understand, because it feels like the right kind of night to speak in flavor. You've wandered from the garden now, full of flavor and half asleep, only to find yourself in a covered bazaar that stretches farther than your imagination wants to go. Vaulted ceilings, mosaic tiles, voices bouncing like songbirds from stone to stone. This is where the city breathes. Here, beneath brass lamps and bunches of dried herbs, you discover the final ingredient in the ancient Persian frozen dream: bazaars, bards, and frosty treats. This place isn't just for buying. It's for listening, watching, tasting. You turn a corner, and suddenly there's a vendor surrounded by small children, flicking shaved ice into ceramic cups with impossible rhythm. His cart is decorated with vines of copper wire, tiny painted lions, and above it, a banner that says roughly, "Snow with Soul." He sings while he works. That's no exaggeration. He's actually singing, in Farsi, a verse about love, ice, and heartbreak involving a runaway mule. The children know all the words. Mainstream historical records often overlook the entertainers of the old bazaars, but they were everywhere storytellers, street poets, musicians, and dessert vendors with a flair for verse. Some were trained bards. Others were just charming loudmouths with a good recipe. And in the late afternoons, especially during summer, they'd all gather near the shaded arches where the air moved slightly cooler. There, the ice vendors would chant about their ingredients. Poets would improvise flavor-themed love poems. One might shout, "My cherry syrup is redder than the cheeks of Farhad's beloved," and his rival would bellow, "But my faluda could cool the fire of Shirin's rage." Quirky footnote: there was once a guild of dessert vendors in Shiraz, whose members had to pass both a taste test and a poetry test. You had to make a decent sorbet and be able to recite at least 10 lines of Hafiz from memory, or at least convincingly fake it. Historians still argue whether this guild was official or just a well-organized clique with great marketing instincts. You stop at another stall, this one quieter. A young woman carves delicate shavings from a block of frozen mulberry syrup, catching them in paper-thin bowls made from dried fig leaves. She smiles, offering you one. You taste. It's rich, sharp, floral. There's a hint of something you can't place, maybe basil seed, maybe a whisper of vinegar. She doesn't explain the ingredients. She sings a verse instead. The snow is soft, the syrup wise, the fig leaf wraps what time denies. You don't know whether to cry or order 3 more. And this wasn't limited to Shiraz. In Isfahan, ice vendors often partnered with musicians. In Tabriz, a cold dessert cart might feature a traveling puppet show about a snowman who falls in love with a flame. In Kashan, Some vendors were known to recite bits of the Charlemagne-Chiz, the national epic between scoops of sour cherry sherbet. Kids would memorize rhymes not for school, but because the right answer might get them a free topping. Adults would pause for a verse, a flavor, a memory. Some treats came wrapped in old poems. Others in rumors of love affairs or scandalous recipes smuggled in from Anatolia. And here's where it gets even more charming. Some carts were mobile libraries. Literally, they sold iced sweets and rented out poetry scrolls for a few coins more. Sweet on the tongue, sweet on the mind. You lean against a pillar, listening as one vendor recites a long, tragic verse about a princess who refused all suitors until one brought her a bowl of saffron snow shaped like a peacock. She married him the next day. He dropped the recipe in the river. Historians still argue whether this tale is a metaphor for culinary loss or just proof that love is fickle and peacocks are expensive. Around you, the bazaar hums. Not loud, not chaotic, just alive. You sip from a melting bowl of violet syrup over powdered ice and think about how much the modern world has lost in its rush for efficiency. No one sings while they scoop anymore. No one swaps pomegranate poems with strangers over slush. But here, in the scented corridor of the past, dessert still comes with rhyme and rhythm. The flavor is memory. The memory is music. And as your bowl empties, so does your need for explanation. Some sweetness doesn't have to make sense. It just needs to sing. You slip through the last arches of the bazaar, stomach full and head hazy with verse, only to find yourself at the edge of a garden. Quieter now. The air has cooled. Lanterns bob in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, someone hums a lullaby while peeling something slowly, tenderly. You're standing at the border of sweetness as you know it, and on the other side lies a revolution. Sugar's strange arrival. Because, believe it or not, for most of the history you've tasted so far, sugar didn't exist in Persia the way it does now. No white crystals, no granulated mountains. Just honey, grape must, dried fruit pastes, and sometimes molasses. And then sugar walked in, smiling, probably uninvited. Definitely here to stay. Mainstream historians place sugar's introduction to Persia sometime between the 6th and 7th century CE, with cultivation becoming widespread under Arab influence by the 9th century. Before that, sweetness was an art, not a commodity. Honey was revered, carefully stored, often used sparingly. Grape syrup dasha was made by boiling down juice until it thickened like syrup, sweet with a faint tang. Carob molasses added depth. Even boiled down pomegranate or date pastes were stirred into chilled ices and sherbets to create what the ancients considered the perfect balance. Sweet, sour, and something just a little strange. Then came sugarcane. It didn't just change dessert, it changed everything. The first sugar factories in Persia were called khan-sazi, literally, sweet-making houses. They were loud, steamy, experimental. Sugar was expensive at first. Medical texts debated whether it was healthy or suspicious. Some physicians swore it cooled the body. Others thought it dulled the mind. Historians still argue whether sugar was welcomed or merely tolerated until it proved its worth in sherbets. And sherbets were where sugar truly made its case. You're handed a bowl, now ice-flavored with sour cherry, lemon, and the tiniest trickle of syrup made from the earliest Persian cane sugar. It sparkles on the tongue, not aggressive, just dot smoother. The shift is subtle but irreversible. With sugar came new techniques: spinning, crystallizing, candying. Suddenly, fruits could be glazed, nuts coated, petals preserved. Sweets lasted longer, melted differently. But not everyone was thrilled. In some rural communities, grandmothers clung to their honey recipes. Some poets mourned the rise of sugar in verse. The bee has fled, the cane stands proud. My bowl is sweet, but sings less loud. One especially grumpy 12th century scholar claimed that sugar dulled the soul, calling it the lazy man's nectar. He insisted that true hospitality still came from rose-infused honey, stirred by hand. Of course, his household still served sugar ices. Here's a quirky twist. For decades, sugar was considered exotic enough that offering it in dessert was seen as trying too hard, especially if paired with snow. The phrase "sugar on snow" was occasionally used sarcastically, like we might say, putting a hat on a hat. Too sweet, too obvious, but secretly, everyone loved it. In the royal courts, sugar was used to make nakshiyak decorative ices carved with patterns, glazed with sugar syrup that hardened like glass. Some even had edible gold leaf. They weren't just desserts, they were events. Meanwhile, in more modest homes, families adapted. A few spoonfuls of sugar in sherbet, a little crystal dusting on a bowl of quince ice. A treat, not a crutch. You sit down now on a low bench beneath a pomegranate tree. The wind carries the scent of distant syrup. A child walks by with a stick of frozen sugar candy, the shards clinking like little bells. And you wonder not for the first time what sweetness used to mean before it was available in heaping teaspoons. Sugar didn't just change dessert. It rewired my craving. It made just enough feel like not quite. It made ice cream what it is today: rich, sweet, indulgent. But deep under that sugar-glossed surface, the memory of honey still lingers. Of date paste scraped onto snow. Of sherbet made sweet with patience, not cane. And even now, centuries later, that quiet difference still melts on the back of your tongue. You leave the garden behind, the taste of sugar lingering. Familiar now, but oddly. Safe, predictable. Tonight, you're ready for something wilder, stranger. The flavors that fell through the cracks of time, not because they were failures, but because they were too bold to stay tame. Tonight, you taste the flavors that time forgot. The table before you isn't a banquet spread. It's a collection of curiosities. Bowls and jars of various sizes, some frosted, some warm, some giving off faint, vinegary steam. And right in the center, a squat little vessel wrapped in linen, beaded with cold. A spoon rests on top, daring you to plunge it in. You do. And what you scoop out is brown, slushy, and smells like pickled plums. This, it turns out, is an ancient frozen tamarind vinegar ice. You pause, sniff, taste. It hits you sideways sour, metallic, sweet, tangy, alive. It feels less like dessert and more like a challenge. Mainstream history doesn't dwell much on these flavors. The safe ones survive. Rosewater, saffron, cardamom, they have lobbyists. But these? These are the ice creams that didn't want to be liked. They wanted to be remembered. Tamarind, for example, was wildly popular in certain southern Persian regions. Sharp, sticky, earthy, it was boiled into syrups and poured over snow with salt and lime. Some even added black pepper. That's right pepper in a frozen dish. It was said to wake the senses or punish them, depending on your tolerance for surprise. You're offered another bowl. This one is barley-based. Yes, barley. Not as a topping, but as the base. Barley water was soaked, flavored with sour orange and mint, and chilled into a frozen drink. The result? Something halfway between iced tea, porridge, and that feeling when you can't quite remember a dream. And it gets weirder. One ancient text scribbled in the margin of a medical scroll describes a frozen dish made from cool lentil paste, sweetened with date syrup and clove, to calm the blood and trick the tongue. It's described as both refreshing and unfortunate. Historians still argue whether this was serious food or an elaborate prank. You take another bite. It's a little too salty, then weirdly floral, then bitter, then oddly comforting. Like something your eccentric great-aunt would make with great pride and no awareness of modern taste. Other forgotten flavors included crushed green almond with vinegar syrup, rosehip and black lime ice, fermented melon peel blended with mint and honey, pickled carrot sherbet. Each one had its moment. Some were linked to folk medicine, others to regional climate. Some may have just been late-night accidents with excellent marketing, but all of them shared one truth. They weren't trying to be delicious. They were trying to say something about seasons, about heat, about the body. You try a spoonful of cucumber mint ice with a dash of garlic. It sounds awful. It single quotes not. It's strange, refreshing, borderline philosophical. You pause between bites, uncertain whether you're enjoying it or just respecting its confidence. And now, a story. A traveling mystic once offered a dish to a noble family: chilled crushed ice, fig syrup, dried coriander, and wait for it onion juice. The family choked, gagged, politely excused themselves, but the youngest daughter loved it. She said it tasted like weather. The mystic laughed and said, "That's exactly what it is." That recipe never made it into mainstream cookbooks, but a version of it was discovered centuries later in a dusty ledger labeled "Flavors Too Strong for Weak Tongues." And that's the point. These flavors weren't supposed to be polite. They were made in mountain villages, desert oases, seaside kitchens where ingredients weren't chosen by committee, but by need, intuition, or sometimes just what was fermenting in the corner. So as you sit here now, spooning something halfway between ice cream and memory, you start to feel oddly grateful for the ones that didn't survive the trend cycle. They were never meant to last forever, just long enough to remind you, taste is temporary, flavor is bold, and sometimes the best part of dessert is not knowing what comes next. It's nearly midnight now. The streets have emptied, the lanterns burn lower, and the air has taken on that peculiar hush that only arrives when a city finally exhales. You wander slowly past closed doors and sleeping vines until you arrive home, or rather, wherever it is you've been staying in this dream of the frozen past. And waiting there, humming quietly in the corner, is your freezer. You open it. Light spills out, pale and unromantic. Inside are your modern comforts. Cartons of vanilla, chocolate chip, a half-eaten pint of salted caramel that tasted better in theory than it ever did on a spoon. You pick it up, shake it, sigh. It's all a bit lifeless now, isn't it? Because once you've tasted snow infused with rosewater and poetry, what is there left to say about mint chocolate chip? You've spent this entire journey dipping your spoon into time echoes in your freezer, realizing that ice cream, in all its forms, didn't begin with cones or factories, or now with 20% more fudge. No, It began with mountains, with moonlight, with people determined to make something beautiful from a bowl of melting snow. Your freezer doesn't hum like a yakhchal. It hums because of electricity, because it's easy. But once, chilling food was a seasonal art, a collaborative miracle between humans and their environment. And flavor wasn't a consumer decision, it was a slow conversation. Historians still argue whether ice cream, as we know it, truly descends from Persian ices or evolved in parallel elsewhere. China has its own claim, as does the Roman Empire. But no one disputes that Persia's influence ran deep through trade, poetry, courtly tradition. Some of the oldest words for frozen treats in Arabic and Turkish trace back to Persian roots. The way we think of sherbet, sorbet, syrup all echoes of older syllables, older hands pouring liquid over snow. And here's the quirky part. Even in modern Iranian kitchens today, grandmothers still tuck small jars of rose syrup in the back of their fridges, not for everyday use, but for moments, for quiet nights, for first dates or funerals, or when the air is too hot and something gentle is needed. A whisper of cold, a thread of memory. You try one of your store-bought flavors. It's not bad. But now, your tongue is listening for something it can't quite hear. And as you lean against the doorframe, spoon in hand, you wonder, could you make your own version? Freeze snow from your backyard. Infuse water with mint. Simmer fruit until it turns into perfume. Not because it's practical, but because it feels right. Because dessert was never supposed to be convenient. It was supposed to be a celebration. And even in your humming modern freezer, those echoes are still there, waiting for someone like you to open the door, close their eyes, and taste history. So now, the lights are low, the streets are silent, the feast is over, and even the snow has melted back into memory. You settle in, blanket around your shoulders, the last flavors still lingering like footprints on your tongue. Saffron, rose, mint, vinegar, barley, dates. Strange combinations, but somehow they all made sense, didn't they? Because each one carried a story. Each one was a hand reaching out from the past, offering not just sweetness, but intention. Close your eyes. Picture the domes of the yakhchal glowing under moonlight. Picture the woman ladling snow into fig leaf bowls. The child whispered poems into her syrup before the first bite. The donkey bless its patient soul providing cream that cooled a summer wedding. And you, drifting from scene to scene, not as a tourist, but as someone remembering something they never lived. Let the warmth of your blanket become the warmth of an ancient fire. Let the hum of your fan become desert wind. Let your mind wander through gardens, courtyards, sun-baked streets, until even time stops asking where you're going. Because that's the magic, isn't it? The oldest recipes weren't written in ink. They were passed through scent, through texture, through whispered jokes at the back of a spice cart. And they've waited centuries, not for fame, but for someone with a quiet evening and a curious tone. Someone like you. So sleep now. Dream in rosewater. Drift through snow. And when you wake, maybe, just maybe, you'll taste the past in every bite of the present.